Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes, and welcome back to the YoVideogames podcast. I'm Matt.
And I'm Andrew.
And once again, thank you to all our generous patrons who kept us going for over 350 episodes.
Yeah, if you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Dude of the week is the Pink Hammer. It's a relatively new dude as producer and maybe one of the best names. I mean, we got Mutton Chop. We got a lot of really good names. And I'm not going to call out some of them because I know they're going to be dudes of the week soon, but then we got like Rurouni Kenshin references.
I mean, like the Pink Hammer is the kind of name you want to be called.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, it depends on what you're being called the Pink Hammer for. If it's for a club foot, it's not nearly as cool. But if it's because you got a big intellect.
And speaking of keeping your hammered, polished, and primed, we have a sponsor.
Yeah, of course, we're talking about Manscaped. And right now, our current favorite product of theirs is the Beard Hedger Pro. And I literally just used this today. Look at this. I tried to get a mustache for you guys, like I promised last episode. But the spot where my dogs bit out, or one of my dogs bit out some of my mustache hair, it's looking a little weird, so I had to keep it short. But short beard's kind of the best. This is the best thing I've ever found for it. Mostly because it's got a really easy guard adjustment. You just roll the dial here and it adjusts by 0.5 millimeter, which is super nice, especially if you want to keep that like long stubble that's rated as the sexiest thing by women, you know, like in the 5 millimeter range or some shit like that. This is the perfect guy for it.
You can do fades and all kinds of stuff too with it.
Yeah, I kind of honestly, I think I use this probably the most out of any of their products, including the ball deodorant.
Yeah, maybe I mean, if you're a guy who has fast growing facial hair, I mean, you're definitely going to get a lot of use out of that.
The thing I love about it is it also charges super fast, so it's just all around convenient. It's got its own carry case that carries the charger and everything, closes, water resistant zipper. But there's a ton of stuff from Manscaped that we love. Of course, the ball trimmer, the lawnmower 2.0,
lawnmower 4.0,
4.0. They're literally pumping out new versions of things. The lawnmower 4.0 is cool because it's completely waterproof. This is water resistant, and apparently you can take it in the shower with you. But like the lawnmower, yeah.
Well, summer's coming. Summer is coming, guys. So if you're going for like, you know, the snug tight fit on your swim attire, make sure nothing, you know, no little tendrils are peeking their heads out from where they shouldn't be. So, and that's
the funny
why
thing is, I'm going to a bachelor party this weekend, and that's exactly that. They want to do like pool crawls, and I was like, well, I gotta clean all of this shit up. Manscaped came in to save the day.
And if you want to go all the way down to the surface of the skin and make your nutsack look like Andrew's head, they've even got a package for that.
Yeah, although I got to be honest with you, I don't know if your nuts can look as good as my head. I'm willing to say, with, you know, they've got the.
I mean, I'm not sure.
Package.
I'm not sure I've ever really heard someone say, "Oh, that guy's nutsack looks great." To be honest, but that's because Manscaped hasn't been around long enough, you know.
I mean, you'll be proud. You'll be like, hey, look at my nuts. And then you go to jail. No, but if you're interested in checking out any of Manscaped's products, especially the Beard Hedger, please go to manscaped.com. Use our code YoVG, all caps, for 20% off and free shipping worldwide. It's manscaped.com. Our code is YoVG, all caps, for 20% off and free shipping worldwide. Your balls will thank you. So will your chin. Chin to chode.
Chin to chode, crown to crotch.
Crown to crotch. Crown to crotch is the better one. I don't want to assume people got a chode. So Twitter's been sort of interesting lately, and topics have been popping up all over Twitter. You know what it is? I've figured out how to. I mean, my For You page is now mostly people talking about video games, and writers and like shit I care about. I don't know if before. You know, I know there used to be the two things, the For You and whatever, the following. but it seemed like on my following page, like I was still getting people I didn't follow. It was like anybody who liked that tweet that I followed, I would see. And I don't know, but I've gotten it dialed in now. And so I'm seeing a lot of cool topics about like movies and video games. And finally, I am not fucking miserable on the internet. Not totally miserable, but you saw a Twitter, like a topic that was
Trending yesterday was so weird because, I live in, my favorite game is like Xenoblade. So I'm like, you don't really see that trending.
never. Yeah, there's you and 40 people who love it. It's not
Mhm.
true. It's doing well. It keeps getting made for a reason.
I mean, when the Nintendo financials came out yesterday, and it was okay.
You know what okay means? Okay means maybe another game.
Exactly.
Although-
I mean, well enough to make another game, and well enough that they raised everyone's salary at the company, but like,
Hell yeah.
still not nearly as good enough as it should be. When you see something like some shit like fucking Switch Sports sell over 9 million copies, and it's like fucking why? But whatever. That's a whole nother rant. I understand the appeal of Wii Sports, and I get why Wii Sports was a phenomenon, and it is a great package. But Switch Sports is a fucking grift.
And I mean, it'll never beat out 1-2 Switch, the OG.
You know what? I think we did one stream of Switch Sports, and I'll tell you this, Andrew. I'll tell you this straight, no lie. 1-2 Switch was a way more entertaining stream than when we played Switch Sports.
Yes. Although
100%. Non-negotiable, non-debatable. 1-2 Switch was a way more entertaining time. Better time, led to better clips, better everything than the time we played Switch Sports. Switch Sports is a fucking grift.
But also, if I would have been there for Switch Sports, it probably would have been more fun. I'm the fun. I bring the fun to any lame game. That's what he's saying. He's saying that for my self-esteem, guys.
I'm just saying fuck Switch Sports mostly, but
but okay, what was this?
So a bunch of topics were trending, and it was like, what the fuck is going on? And I was like, it was like Pyra, Mithra, Xenoblade, and I was like, what in the fuck? And so what happened was the Sky Bennett, the actress who played Pyra and Mithra in the English version, dub version of Xenoblade 2, literally went on like not even just like a bit, like, a full Twitter thing saying she did not agree. And this is spoilers for Xenoblade 3. Fuck you if you haven't played it yet. You should have. So Xenoblade 3 shows what happened to the characters from Xenoblade 2. And the main character from Xenoblade 2, to everyone's surprise, ended up in a how do I pronounce this? He ended up in a poly marriage. He ended up in a poly marriage, and she basically said she didn't agree with that. She thought, because she plays two characters, Pyra and Mithra, she thought Mithra would never have gone for him. And she felt Pyra was the one who was in love with him. Mithra would not have done that, and she didn't. The third wife, she didn't really say anything about the third wife.
I'm sorry, dude pulled 3 wives?
Yes.
Nah.
And she was just like, nah, not him. I don't believe that character would do it. And she was like, I would know. I played the character. So there was a lot of bitching, I guess. I saw more bitching about people bitching than people actually bitching, if that makes sense. Where it was like, I felt like there was more talk about the people who were upset with her. I mean, I saw some people were like, no, that's not, whatever. And here's my whole thing was just like, look, actors sometimes have different interpretations for the future of their characters from the director and the writer. Happens a lot.
and also the performance happens in a point in time where the future isn't known, even maybe sometimes to the director or the writer. Like things change, ideas happen. But it is kind of an interesting thought to that whole like controversy is often more blown up by the people talking about the controversy than the actual controversy.
And I think that's what happened, because she wasn't like like run off of Twitter or anything. It wasn't. She had a little. She got a little snarky. Replies back to some of the people who were snarky to her. about it. I will say it's kind of it probably does sting if anyone's in a healthy poly relationship. And when they have positive representation for once in a video game, here, lo and behold, here comes the actress going, I think that's bullshit. So that could be, I could see how that might sting a little bit here. But on the other hand, I'm like, it's a fucking video game and these are fucking video game characters. And I never fucking thought about it really. I didn't really fucking care.
Yeah.
Personally, it was like, did you think? Like, I don't know. I didn't. Like, is you okay with this? I don't fucking care. I'm like, they're fictional characters. Like, whatever. To me, I'm just this so many steps removed from giving a shit about the relationship status of a fictional character after their game. I don't fucking care. Like that. Right. This is something. Obviously, a lot of people love this shit. This is something people will fucking like go to a fucking war over.
Well, so I guess my question is, one, is this the Western voice actress or the?
Yes.
Yeah. I always kind of wonder if like the Japanese voice actors don't get this kind of pushback just because like
most of the time they're not this outspoken about it either.
Well, so this is like a weird sort of rabbit hole that I have no like direct evidence of this. But a lot of Western voice actors treat acting as like I mean a lot of Western actors in general treat acting like it's a high art, and then like a lot of I've noticed Japanese voice actors specifically treat it like it is a technician's craft, where they're not necessarily interested, like they hit the emotional beats not because they necessarily built like an inner monologue for the character, but because they're all like, yes, because I'm a technician. Like you want simmering rage, I've got simmering rage. You want
and people do fucking love, like there is a huge fucking fandom for voice actors in Japan.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They're treated very, very well, but they're not people who usually, you just don't hear about them usually talking about the authorial intent of any given project they're on.
Yeah, it's just some like, and I could be totally utterly wrong too. Like I genuinely I have no actual evidence. It's just like something I've noticed purely through Twitter. Like when I see a translated tweet and stuff, just like how they tend to talk about the craft. And I'm not even I'm not favoring one or the other. I think acting, especially any kind of I guess any kind of acting really, but like especially like very dramatic acting is hard to sell if you don't have some sort of like inner character monologue going on. Comedy you can kind of float sometimes being snarky. Personally, I think comedic acting is every bit as hard from a dramatic perspective as dramatic acting, but
in a different way.
Yeah, that's a whole other side topic we could go down, but my point that I was getting at is like, it's not that I'm trying to disparage one or the other. It's just like this weird, the way they like TV DPs, directors of photography, or here's better. TV directors are viewed as technicians versus film directors who are viewed as, artists, whereas like a TV director does every bit of the same job as a film director, except they don't necessarily have total creative control over the story and the actors. The writer on set or the writer will dictate certain things. So they are more technically, making sure they have coverage, and they'll get to sneak in artistic shots and stuff plenty.
Yeah.
But like they're more closer to what a film DP does than what a film director does in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's the same. And
there's this, it reminded me of another incident when David Hayter was speaking, I believe at a comic book or video game convention. I don't remember which one, or an anime convention. And he was saying that, and this actually, from what I understand, this might've been something maybe got him, in trouble, is that there was a scene in Metal Gear Solid 4 where Snake puts a gun to his mouth. And he's like, "Oh, I have to like stop this." And then he thinks about it, and then he puts the gun down. He doesn't do it. And he said in his mind, he was like, Snake wouldn't have any issue doing this. If Snake felt like the best course of action was to off himself, he wouldn't have any issue pulling the trigger. He would have just done it. And that apparently did not go. Supposedly, that there's rumors that maybe was something Kojima really didn't like when word got back to him that he said that publicly. I know there's an interview with Jeremy Blaustein, who was the localizer on Metal Gear Solid 1, and partially or close to the end of that development, he got kicked off of the project and removed from ever working with Kojima again because he did not like the fact that he was changing some of the wording in his script, because Kojima wanted his script to remain untouched. This goes into things I've heard, because everyone likes Kojima. Kojima's kind of like a hero, video game legend hero, but he is also someone who really, 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 really doesn't like anyone touching his script. And I forget who was I think it's Tarantino is like, do not ad lib, or is it the Coen brothers? I think it was the Coen brothers, are very much like, do not fucking. They've only allowed one person ever to ad lib, and that's Jeff Bridges.
Well, how are you gonna tell Jeff Bridges not to do it? I do know that any writer, like Sorkin, doesn't like ad libbing at all. You can't ad lib any of his scripts, especially when there's like a cadence or like a lot of comedy that like Mel Brooks wouldn't necessarily allow you to ad lib, from what I understand. Because a lot of comedy can be like the word specifically is what is funny when the response comes, or like how you say the word is what makes the whole thing funny.
And then there's directors who are the opposite. Paul, whatever his name was, did Bridesmaids and the reboot of Ghostbusters.
I know who you're talking about.
And he is very much like, I get to assemble the people and we have an idea, and then I just let them kind of like figure out the script on set, and just take after take after take after take. And I remember how Dan Aykroyd talked about publicly, like on TV, on like Good Morning America or some morning show, about how like he is not welcome on the Sony lot because he wasted way too much of their money and time filming the way he did for that movie, which caused a bunch of reshoots and shit. Because it's an effects heavy driven film. You stay on fucking script. You don't just like have people sit there and just like talk about shit all day, and like take 500 takes or whatever until they find the joke that lands. Yeah,
the gem.
Yeah,
that could be really hard. I mean, I know with digital, it's a lot easier now to just kind of let things roll. But it isn't any less expensive. Like, people have this idea in their head that like, just because you're not burning film, it isn't as expensive. It's still pretty expensive to just let the cameras run.
Still costly.
Yeah, it's still really expensive.
Yeah. So and that's kind of leads into, I think this kind of leads into another thing where like, you don't have a lot of like heavy authorial intent in a lot of games. Honestly, you have your Kojimas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really interesting, because you just don't really hear about that or see that. One, you don't really have a video game franchise where even its creator takes the story that seriously. Case in point, I would argue, is like fucking Resident Evil. But
well, no one has ever taken that story seriously until probably the remakes, and a lot of the things that they've changed to try and make things work has pissed off a bunch of the OG fans.
Right. Yeah. So like maybe some people like fucking David Cage or whatever, but no one wants to work with his ass anyways now. So like, you don't really get a lot of people who are really dedicated to the writing of a video game. So it's really interesting when you hear someone actually, because most of the time, and here's the other thing too. Most time in English, especially, people are doing so many fucking roles a year, a month. They don't have time to even sit and think about, their character or their role. So it was almost complimentary that like Sky Bennett remembers Pyra/Mythra so well that she would have an opinion 5.5 years later about their relationship status of the character, which is like, wow, I can't even believe you recall that. Like, there was a guy when Definitive Edition came out, and he was saying like, I don't get it. Like, He says, 11 years ago, I voiced this character Dunban, and I've never gotten more fan mail and people who talk about they love my performance than for this game I knew nothing about. Like he probably didn't remember much about it. The idea was just like, I did this gig job like 11 years ago, and it became like the most commented thing I've ever done. Like I received the most comments.
Well, I do think that's most prolific voice actors are probably like most prolific TV actors or people you'd call like a character actor, where like you're not necessarily making a shitload of money per character or per role.
Yeah, I know.
Because in some cases you might only have like 5 or 6 lines, so you come in, kick ass at it, and leave, and never think about that character again.
Yeah.
It is sort of an interesting. It makes you really think about the craft of acting. Like a writing tip that I was once given that has held pretty true is if you want your actors to be memorable or your characters to be memorable on the page, giving them one physical tick that they do in every scene, every time you see them, it's a thing you mention every single time. It could be like, oh, this dude has a soul patch. And so every time the actor shows up in the script, some comment is made about his soul patch in dialogue or in description. Usually description is better, because it makes it stick with readers. So that, and character actors are very similar in that every character they play, because they play so many characters, they look for that one tick, that one thing that makes them memorable. In the 5 lines of it, that's where like Stanley Tucci shines, or like John Turturro, I think probably would be. He would be another example of a classic character. Gary Oldman is technically a character actor. He's just had wild success. But like, look at every role Gary Oldman's ever played. He works just like a character actor, where like each of his characters have some sort of tick that is specifically memorable about that character, be it a drug habit where he bites a pill and screams in fucking The Professional, to when he's got those dreadlocks and that one milky eye in that other movie. Like you just always remember him. I wonder if it's similar to where it's like, oh, as a voice actor, they try to find that one thing, but then there's going to be those other actors that like they have to have a deep inner monologue to get that emotion. You know what I mean? Like maybe that's why she has like that kind of a connection to that character. I don't know. I've never played the game, so I don't know how, central that character is. Like how much time did she spend working on that character?
Oh, she's main character. And
so she was there for a couple of weeks at least.
Yeah. And came back for like
right
DLC and for Smash Brothers and stuff. And you're basically playing a character who literally has they basically go through shock and develop dissociative identity disorder because of it.
Wow.
So has to be real in the head of their character.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess she created I don't, how often is the director or the writer, if they're not the same person, on set with the voice actors going
weirdly in Xenoblade's case, the writer director is the voice director for the Japanese dub.
For the Japanese dub.
I don't think he's involved with the English recording at all.
I wonder if there's kind of like a literal lost in translation where she's never talked to the director to know what his intent is anyway.
No, I don't think so. From what has been said, no.
That's interesting as hell, though, because how many games where the game director has like a clear authorial intent? And I mean, obviously, we can point to The Last of Us, right? That's probably got everybody gets pissed or is elated by that authorial intent. How many of the actors involved in Last of Us are not on the same page with that intent? I wonder about that in terms of
Yeah,
'cause
and
that's a pretty controversial game in terms of how the story ends up going.
yeah.
How many actors don't agree with that? Probably not any
Well,
smart ones, because
in going through,
they want to
going
not
through,
have work.
listing examples, I was like, Harrison Ford famously disagrees with Ridley Scott in Blade Runner that his character is a replicant. Harrison Ford does not think he's a replicant. He is absolutely adamant that he is not. He's a human. The writers of the movie were like, "Yeah, he's human." Ridley Scott made this, like, we don't know where he fucking got this idea, but like Ridley Scott's convinced he's always had it, and that like all the multiple cuts were just to sort of prove it.
Well,
And it absolutely in Ridley Scott's head, he is in his head is one thing is this character is a replicant, and then the writer and the actor are like, no, you're fucking insane.
well, like, and look, I write, and so I'm biased towards leaning on the writer's side. But film is a director's medium,
Yeah.
and so it doesn't matter what the actor, the writer says. If the director's like, "Yeah, he's a replicant," he's a fucking replicant, and I know that sucks because probably it's better the other way, but director
It
says he's a replicant, he's
is,
a
and
fucking
that's why
replicant.
Denis Villeneuve specifically would not answer it.
Right, and Denis Villeneuve is God, I'm saying that guy's name wrong. I know it, but best working director right now, I think. He is famous for involving the writer through every phase of production and like working very closely with the writer to make sure he doesn't change the writer's intent. And I sort of, that's almost romantic because in film that just doesn't happen. Like writers have come forward about working with him where they're just like, most shocking thing ever. Most of the time you sell it, you'll have one meeting with the director and you'll never hear from him again. They'll hire a different writer to rewrite shit, change shit, whatever. No, Denny takes you through every process, continuously has lunch with you, asks you character questions, asks you background questions, makes notes. Like he is a writer's director, which is rare as hell.
Yeah, and I remember watching interviews with him where he went through the scene in Dune, and he was talking about all these lore shit. I put this character is like this character is because he would stop and he had his little pen to circle stuff, and he's like, in this room there's a bunch of books here because there was a war against AI, and AI has been outlawed, and everyone uses books now. Everything's about memory, and that's why this is that's why we. That is the reason for this setting or having this in the background, or why things look this way, or da 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 da, and going through each character's head, from second to second in the scene and whatever. So, which you definitely, games have been cinematic, but most of the time you don't hear about directors who are that crazy involved or whatever, right?
Well, you don't have that many auteurs in gaming yet. I think it's just starting to kind of be recognized. Kojima was always the famous guy to point to as though, all of his games up until very recently were the same franchise.
Yeah.
And it's hard to go he's...
Oh, look at Andrew throwing shaded book tie. The sun is in your hands for the Game Boy Advance.
Fair. But my point is it's not that doesn't make him an auteur or that makes him not an auteur. It's that when all of your games or all of your movies, in the case that I actually would understand auteurships, is when all of them are in the same franchise, it's hard to say that your voice is the strongest part of the story, right? An auteur is somebody who can tell any story and you see their stamp on that story. It's a Tarantino movie the moment you go see a Tarantino. It's a Spielberg film.
Yeah.
He's got,
right.
2 or 3 very specific shots. He has a very specific sort of language that he uses in all of his films. He references classic films constantly, that kind of stuff. How he treats father-son relationships, shit like that. I would actually argue that even though I love Denny, you don't necessarily know it's a Denny movie right away. Like he doesn't necessarily have his stamp on there. Now, there is something to be said is that he's a chameleon and he can make any story the star of the show in a sense. There's plenty of argument for that. I'm just saying by the definition I'm using, he doesn't necessarily count as an auteur. Still an amazing director nonetheless. Who's another director that I would... George Lucas isn't an auteur, right? You're seeing a George Lucas film, I suppose, but
him and his swipes,
right? Yeah, mostly because of the editing transitions. But I'm not trying to throw shade at Lucas, but it's just to say like his films don't have a particular personality specific to him.
Not specific to him, because his personality to me is like really shitty Kurosawa.
No,
that is the directorial style of George Lucas, is to like Kurosawa, but done poorly. Without any ability to communicate with humans.
I would say more, it's not that he is Kurosawa done poorly. I think it's just that he cares more about the technology and getting all of the story on screen than he does about style of how he tells you the story. Like Lucas would be an amazing TV director in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
He'd be an excellent TV director. Probably. I mean, he's probably directed TV that I just don't know of off the top of my head, and it's probably been great. I'm not trying to shit on.
He was hands on with like Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, for whatever that's worth, for some of the episodes.
Well, I'd never watched that. I don't know a single person who loves it, so that's not a ringing endorsement, I suppose. But like in terms of like video games, how many video game directors have worked across multiple genres, multiple games, and had a very specific touch? Shinji Mikami?
Yeah, a little bit there. Kamiya, definitely Kamiya.
Kamiya, probably real safe to say him. Kojima now, I guess, technically, but...
Yeah, because a lot of times, like, some of the biggest directors have just sort of a singular style. Like, they make these kind of games and only these kind of games, right?
Right. Cory Balrog.
Or David Cage.
David Cage.
To bring his ass back. Like, he's kind of always done the same kind of game.
Well, I think everybody who ever goes to become a storyteller of any sort wants to be an auteur. They want to have style. They want to have that.
Yeah, well, it's like
David Cage clearly wants that.
You can also very easily argue Miyamoto, because he was heavily involved or directed a lot of multiple genre style games.
But do you know it's a Miyamoto game immediately?
It almost just kind of falls in line. It's a Nintendo game, and not everything Miyamoto touches has been not every Nintendo game has been a Miyamoto game.
But he has set that standard.
You could definitely argue like the same way to Takashi Tezuka.
What's some stuff that Tezuka's done?
So he directed Mario 3, Mario World, Link to the Past, Yoshi's Island. So he's Link's Awakening. He's definitely kind of bounced around a little bit, but the thing that I think defines both Tezuka and Miyamoto is that they're very enamored with the hook, the gameplay hook,
right? More
than they're enamored with, how do I narratively tell this tale or whatever, right? But it's interesting because going all the way, going back to the beginning with Xenoblade, like it's only called Xenoblade because of Iwata. Because Iwata wanted to have an author stamp. He said people should know it's your kind of game. Like, hey, we're going to release this game. It's going to have this completely different thing. But I think it should be called this, because then people will know right away that it's your game. Because people won't know necessarily it's this kind of game. It's going to have this kind of crazy story or something. We should call it something that's going to like tip people off that it's your kind of game.
Right.
Which is really interesting in a way. I guess in film that might be seen as a sort of backhanded, but in gaming it was kind of like, no, I want people to know it was you. Because a lot of early video gaming was all about drowning out the people who made it. That was something Kojima had to fight for his whole life, was people knowing who made the game, because Konami especially and Nintendo and Capcom would always hide the names of their employees.
Right, because they don't want to pay you. They don't want to pay you better.
They don't want to pay you better. They don't want you to get poached.
Right.
And poaching happens. Poaching just happened. They poached the Yakuza series producer away from Sega, like Tencent did. So,
well, then Sega should have paid him better.
well, you know what the funny thing about it is, like, he gave an interview after, and he's like, "So why did you leave?" He's like, "Because I wanted to make games, and they wanted to put me in managerial. Like, I had gotten promoted out of game development, so I was no longer in game development. And I didn't want to be in the business side of things. I wanted to be making the games.
Right.
So when they offered me a big paycheck to come make a game, I left."
Yeah, that doesn't seem all that crazy, huh? Doesn't seem like that's shocking. I don't know why that's a thing either. Where it's
like
like
this weird thing within like Nintendo where it's like, oh, you did really well. We need to bump you up into a management position. What if I don't want to manage people? That is what you do. That is the corporate ladder, son.
Right.
You do not stay on the same rung. You climb to the next.
Pay me better.
Even when it's a job you want nothing to do with.
Right. So before Kojima, because Kojima's probably the most classic example of an auteur. I'm trying to think, when did auteurship in gaming really start?
Well, I seem to remember like Sid Meier, right? His name be kind of dropped and
yeah, and that would let you know you're getting a Civ type,
right?
game.
Like what was the Warren Spector, I think, with like Deus Ex Thief, whatever. PC Space seemed to have this, like that would happen a couple times. Will Wright, right? He was the guy who made Spore and Sims and whatever.
Right. Yeah. So you didn't necessarily get. I guess that's actually another thing that I'm doing, is where, like, when I think of auteurship, I think of story. And that's not necessarily important to the vast majority of gaming.
Well, it's way more important now than it used to be.
Yeah, because now there is definitely a drive to be more cinematic. It's They want the prestige of being storytellers.
And the weird thing now is that there's still a lot of big franchises that they don't put any emphasis on who's writing it. And that's where you literally come into issues like Resident Evil. Like the fandom is all about, like the fandom is like rabidly obsessive with the story and the lore and this.
We sure
and
are.
it's fucking changed hands almost as many times as there's been games.
Well, there's been no consistent like show Bible. There's been no consistent Bible for the series. It's just whatever the fuck
and even I think even the people, because they even hired a person, Mikami at one point hired a person to come in and write out a bunch of stuff for like 2-3 whatever. And I don't think that person, I don't think they work on Resident Evil anymore, and B, I don't even think they care.
Right.
Like, I know there's been efforts to try to get a hold of some people, like, hey, so what was the thing here? And like I think it had something to do with this. Like I've seen some of the Resident Evil fandom where like they try to contact like people who were involved, like responsible for writing certain things in certain older titles, and they're just kind of like, I think it had something to do with this. Like they've moved on so fucking far away. Like this is like it didn't really occur to them. It didn't stick with them.
Well, because also back in the day being like all the way up until probably the mid 2000s, maybe even later, the game was made first, and then they'd hire a writer to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Like they'd hire a writer to be like, hey, make sense of this thing, and it's got to be 300 words that fits in a booklet. You're like, okay.
Yeah, and that kind of goes for like fighting games too, where it's like, fighting game stories, like they have stories, but
they were all done after the fact, and
they're very much afterthoughts until like NetherRealm came around, and they have a guy, and I've spoken to the man who writes the stories for like modern day Mortal Kombat games, like the head writer.
Well, that's why their single player stuff is supposed to be really good,
right? So they have this really big emphasis on that, and it's kind of fascinating there because it's someone like there's someone who's actually planning stuff out thinking stuff out all the way through. You know, that's his job, is to make a story out of this. Which is pretty cool that they do that, honestly.
So
But I don't think like Ronda Rousey, you know, round whatever her name was, is going to sit there and be like, I think Sonya would have done this in MK, you know, the next MK game, right?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, she probably wouldn't care.
She wouldn't care. Well, I mean, she's a celebrity. Celebrities generally don't give a shit ever. I mean, can you ever think of a celebrity that gave? I mean, okay, not in gaming. I certainly can't. I cannot think of a celebrity that ever gave a shit about their character in a video game.
I bet Ice-T would.
He might, yeah. I can think of voice actors who give a shit about their character.
Oh yeah, plenty.
Even if they don't own the character, but like Robin Williams was pretty protective of his likeness and voice, whatever.
Voice and stuff, yeah.
James Woods is, even though he's gone way off the deep end, he loves Hades. He will always voice Hades, kind of thing. Just loves the character, and
he has the perfect voice for the God of the Damned.
Yeah. And the guy who played the main character Hiccup in How to Train Your Dragon loved the character. Said, "I will always come back for this character." Like,
yeah,
because like they get a contract where it's like they get a right of first refusal, where like they will always be contacted first to reprise a role, and if they don't want to, they can pass it on to someone else. You know, a lot of times, a lot of actors are just like, "Nah, like how much are you paying me?" No. Like, but some actors are just like, I love this role. I will play this role.
Yeah.
Like, so when you call me up and say, hey, it's a small project, it's a TV spinoff or whatever, I'm like, yep, there. Like the line, you love to see that. To me personally, like that's where it's like you love to see that.
Right, and sometimes that's out of their control, right? Where they can't take that, because if the payday's too small and they take it, and there's no back end and stuff, it can affect their line on future projects.
Yeah, and Batista like famously didn't voice Drax in one of the What If for Marvel, and people were asking like, "Wow, they got all these other actors back. How come you didn't?" And he's like, "What?" And he was like, "I didn't know about it." And he's like, he basically asked his agent, "What the fuck?" And his agent was like, "Oh, it was such a tiny thing, and we didn't think you would be interested." And he was like, he was actually mad. He was like, "Excuse me, the fuck?" And it ended up being one of the last things Chadwick Boseman ever did, and so he was kind of like pissed about it.
Oh man, that sucks. Yeah, I'm trying to think of who the earliest. Well, okay, so in modern day gaming, like today, right now, we have to name who is the auteur. Like who's the guy?
Oh, it's fucking Neil Druckmann.
It's probably Druckmann, right?
But Druckmann is definitely the biggest auteur. Like the auteur who will devolve into a flame war on the internet over his stuff.
Yeah, I figure. I guess you can't not know his intent. I was trying to think of like a game. Like if you look at Kojima's games, to go to a less fiery individual, divisive. If you look at his games, do they have like anyone in particular? Metal Gear Solid 3. Does he have like a clear, author's intent with that game? That like who could disagree? Like it's not like the guy who plays Revolver Ocelot in that is going to be like, well, I always thought Ocelot was blah blah blah. Like something about Kojima's writing is that he tends to tell you exactly what is going on. He does tend to just fucking say it. That's how you get love blooms on the battlefield, or blossoms on the battlefield, that kind of shit. Ocelot will straight up tell you exactly what's going through his head and his motivations. It's hard to have like a, I guess,
but have an interpretation. Yeah,
like
it's hard to know exactly. Have something that could be interpreted wrong. It's pretty obvious most of the time.
So I'm trying to think of like who's what's a game where it constantly gets misinterpreted. So the furthest back I would go to, we've talked about, is like Link's Awakening, where it's like the biggest complaint I see about Link's Awakening is people hate that it's all a dream. And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but that's the moral dilemma. Is like you find out
Yeah.
it's a dream and you find out you can stay asleep forever and everyone lives, or you wake up and everyone here dies. Well, nobody's
Yeah.
real. It's all a dream. But they're real enough.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. And everyone thinks like, oh, it was all just because a lot of people always interpret it as, oh, Link was just dreaming. I'm like, no, 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 no. It wasn't his dream. And like they tell you this point blank in the game, but people really just
right.
don't pay attention to text. Because people are like, oh, they think it's like Mario 2, where it's like, oh, it all just happened in Mario when Mario was dreaming in bed. I'm like, no, that's not what the game is. It's not what it's about. It's about someone who enters some other creature's dream and is like, do I wake the creature or do I stay there with the people it's created in its dream? And everyone's like, well, they're not real. And it's like, to get existentially, it's like, well, again, what is reality? What is, oh, you're
Right.
real. I'm like, you're 2 generations away from being completely forgotten by every living soul on the planet, and there will be no trace that you ever had existed or would. You might as well have been the dream of someone, because that's all you will be, because that's all most of humanity is and has been, throughout the thousands of years we've been around here. It's like there's millions of years on this planet. We're all just sort of like a random cosmic, happenstance of stardust smashing together.
Cue dust in the wind.
Right. So it's like,
Yeah.
that's what's interesting about it, is it's kind of like, well, he's not real. And I'm like, well, whatever. He could just go live his life out with the people who are very, very much real enough to him in the dream kind of thing. Like, there's a lot of great stuff there, but, but yeah, like people don't, I think probably one of the weirdest, or at least hard to follow, is probably Nomura's wild ride in Kingdom Hearts. And then there's the other aspect, which is he's still around and still writing, is Nojima at Square Enix, who really is responsible for a lot more of Final Fantasy VII, and he's even been involved in other like high-profile Square games. And he's the real nutter when it comes to a lot of that stuff. He's the one who has like the craziest ideas. And actually, even Nomura has actually been one who's had to rope him in a few times, because he's wanted to do like just fucking insane things with the storyline in the games. And he's just a writer. He's just a writer with a lot of crazy fucking ideas, and people have to like rein him in.
So I guess what there's no real, clearly defined auteur. Like, there's no Druckmann outside of Kojima from the 90s.
From the 90s?
Yeah, like, so say, like, because like the guy who wrote and directed Xenoblade and Xenosaga, he's been working on that same thing for friggin'
25 years.
25 years.
He only just finished it.
So he's probably an auteur, but since he's only ever worked on one thing, when he works on another thing, will you be able to tell it's his?
It's a really good question.
That's
exciting, though. I actually am excited about that.
Yeah, hell yeah. Will he work on another thing?
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's the fun of auteurs, by the way. Like, I really respect the hell out of a director who can kind of tell any story without you necessarily feeling like they're like, if Tarantino told a Star Wars story, is it really a Star Wars story? Like, it
might actually have the interesting dialogue.
I mean, Rogue One had somewhat interesting dialogue, and most of Tony Gilroy's stuff in Andor has some of the most interesting dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like my point is like, that's the other side of it, is an auteur you don't necessarily get the clearest story from an auteur all the time.
Well, that's definitely the closest one to that is like Yoko Taro, where it's like his stories are all
Yoko Taro's
stuff's all over the place, but it's definitely his.
No, that's actually, I would say he's probably a good choice for an auteur, although he only writes, or does he direct the games too?
He writes and directs.
Yeah, so I guess he's probably a pretty clear cut.
And he'll put fucking story in stage plays.
Yeah,
that only come out in Japan for some fucking inane reason.
Makes him laugh, I guess. I don't know.
It does. He is a crazy dude, man. Like,
so we've got Yoko Taro, we've got Neil Druckmann, we've got Kojima, Kamiya, Shinji Mikami. You know what it is like most of the auteurs in gaming, especially ones from earlier than the last 10 years, all Japanese.
Well, yeah, because like I feel like there was the PC space where people were really trying to do stuff there. You know, your Warren Spector, Will Wright,
Mhm.
Sid Mead. They were trying to do stuff there. I honestly believe that, and I believe it's worth bringing those names up, right? I think it's Warren Spector, whoever did Epic Mickey, but he was the Deus Ex Thief guy, right? They were
Yeah.
trying to tell stuff. You know, who's actually really an auteur, and we're not naming him, Ken Levine
Ken Levine. What did Ken Levine
or
do?
Levine, System Shock, BioShock.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, his stuff definitely stands out and has a very particular style.
He definitely wants to put like he's such a weird individual too in a way, because like he definitely has these stories with these morals with these like he both gameplay and setting wise he's always trying to tell something, right? But he gets upset when he can't get the fucking dude bros to buy his games. Like he lamented the fact that he couldn't get all the Halo frat boys to buy BioShock Infinite, and I'm like, why do you care? These people are fucking like their
Oh,
brains
that's
are
how you get
baked.
to tell more. That's how you get to make more games.
Yeah, and he's kind of an unfortunate thing where it's like, oh, the BioShock games did really well, and yet lo and behold, like it wasn't like an immediate forever cash cow for 2K games because it's 2K games.
Right.
Um,
Well, they've sort of had a rough go of cash cow games in general.
I mean, they own Take Two, or I'm sorry, they own Rockstar, so it's like they don't care. I feel like they're very
Yeah,
much like, eh.
but they
Release
don't
a
have a COD.
Borderlands every
Everybody
other
wants a
than
COD. You know, a game you
yeah.
can release every year. Ubisoft
Yeah,
tried to do that with
exactly.
every
But
goddamn
the thing
franchise.
was is that Ken Levine said like it felt like he wanted BioShock to become COD. I'm like, why do you want BioShock to become COD? Because every BioShock game, like, because he did one in Infinite, you know, in System Shock 2 or whatever, and it's like you make games that are very carefully scripted, thought out, planned, whatever. COD is a fucking meat grinding factory that churns out a game once a year. Like,
Yeah,
why do you want this? It was kind of like he wanted the fame and the sales numbers to reflect the most brain dead mainstream of mainstream. And it's just kind of like, look, if you're trying to write something provocative or thought provoking, you will never get major sales. You might get good sales. You might break through and you might sell like 8-10 million copies, which is amazing. And you should be really fucking happy with that. But are you ever going to sell 20 plus million copies of something that's like thought provoking? Fuck no. Like, Near Automata is up to 7.5 million copies sold, which is phenomenal.
for Near Automata.
Phenomenal for Near Automata. It's like, well, that's not like Mario Kart 8, Deluxe has sold 53 million. I'm like, yeah, and it's Mario Kart 8. Like, can you believe enough people wanted to go dive into some fucking existential dread robot game? Like,
Well, you could argue that about half of them had no idea.
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, half of them are probably just there because her butt.
I mean, it's a good butt. It is. We know it. We know it.
So, I mean, granted, cool, whatever. We hooked you in with live bait or whatever.
Hell
You
yeah.
got like a big dumb fish biting in on it, and then you got hurt because then you read the story, and then all of a sudden now your mouth's been pierced. Like, oh, it hurts. I'm like, yeah, suckered you in.
See if we can start a new Twitter controversy by saying that stories in games don't matter. God, who is it that we made Steve? We made Steve really mad because we said that story in game doesn't matter, and we both held that opinion for a long time. And
Yeah,
it was true for a very long time.
I think it was true, but like we finally got to a point where like there can be genres that are mostly just driven, like visual novels,
Right.
whatnot. Which is funny because he'd never fucking play a game like that.
Who is the director of Hellblade?
Oh, Tamim, whatever the fuck his name is, DMC director.
Yeah, Tamim Antoniades.
I don't know how to say his last name. It's Tamim.
That That game. Oh yeah, he did do DMC.
Yep.
Huh. I was looking at his games developed, and really, it's like Hellblade stands out as
The
he's
funny
not
thing
even doing.
is,
Oh no, he is doing the second
the
one.
funny thing is, he's really good friends with Alex Garland, I believe. It was either Danny Boyle or Alex Garland, but I think it's Alex Garland.
Alex Garland that would explain a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like the film writer Alex Garland.
Oh yeah. For people who don't know, Alex Garland did. He wrote 28 Days Later, Sunshine, Ex Machina, Annihilation, which is still one of the best sci-fi movies in a long time. He does real good sci-fi.
And he wrote treatments for both Enslaved by Ninja Theory and DMC. He has writing credits on DMC.
Huh.
Which I'm still kind of confused by because
Baffled by.
Just baffled. I mean, granted, I actually don't think I think he's a man who I think he's a good writer that's usually really bad at third acts. But he's gotten better. I didn't see Ex Machina, but like Annihilation was good, was solid all the way through for the most part. But like 28 Days Later and Sunshine are both kind of like, wow, what the fuck happened in the third act here, buddy?
Well, 28 Days Later, I feel like it ran out of time. Like it wanted to be this slow creeping horror, like this slow creeping kind of thing. And then all of a sudden that last act is just like punch you in the face. Everything happens at once. And Cillian Murphy really carries that third act on his shoulders purely in the eyes. We'll say like there's not really a lot of dialogue and stuff. It's a very quick wrap up. Sunshine, I don't know if there's a reasoning behind it. Sunshine is an incredible movie
and then
until the third act.
And then it becomes a generic slasher flick.
Yeah, in the third act, it definitely like there's. I wonder if that's his fault or if that's because that's Ex Machina and Annihilation are movies he also directed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both those are very strong films. Annihilation, the book,
I think
by the
both
way.
films, 28 Days and Sunshine, are both Danny O'Boyle films.
Danny Boyle, yeah.
Danny Boyle, O'Boyle.
Yeah, Danny Boyle is a music video director.
Explains Sunshine a lot.
Yeah, well, it also explains just kind of how he shoots. All of his stuff is very kinetic in its editing. Mm-hmm. And so everything seems to build. He likes his movies this is my own opinion, but he likes his movies to build in pace of how many cuts happen. And so the climax has really fast cutting and yeah.
I don't know. It's a little weird.
But didn't Danny Boyle also do Train Spotting?
I think so.
Yeah, you got to see that shit.
That sounds right.
Anybody who's like Ewan McGregor's Clean Cut. Danny Boyle did that? Yes, he did. He did indeed.
I don't know. It's a weird thing though in gaming because like most people don't have a story to tell like in gaming, and those who do usually kind of fail miserably at it. Here's a miserable failure he's one of the greatest game designers of all fucking time. And he had a great story he wanted to tell, and he fucking failed miserably at it twice. Yu Suzuki. And he created Shenmue.
Oh, man.
And he's one of the great game directors of all time because, he made so many genre-defining game, Space Harrier, which pretty much created the rail shooter, Virtua Fighter, which created a 3D fighter, Outrun, and like some of the virtual racing, like him and AM2, they were pioneers, complete, true, utter pioneers.
But then he tries to tell a story, and it's just
he had
like
this big story he wanted to tell with Shenmue, and it's fucking. And the funny thing is like the story in Shenmue works, like it can work. It's funny they tried to make an anime, and not enough people watched it, but
how many sailors watch anime?
All right, so it's like. The story of Shenmue is actually kind of neat. It's actually kind of cool. The game is fucking miserable. And people will say it's ahead of its time. No, not really. Not really. When you look at how close the release of Majora's Mask was to to Shenmue 1, it's like, no, they really it wasn't really that much. It really wasn't that ahead of its time. And it was just bad. You were all enamored by graphics and details.
A lot of people love Shenmue. This is going to be the most
I
controversial take you have.
beat Shenmue 1. I beat Shenmue 2. I beat Shenmue 3. Most people who don't like Shenmue obviously never got through Shenmue, and I don't fucking blame them. But he had a story to tell, and he's never going to get to finish it because he fucked that opportunity up so fucking bad on Shenmue 3. And I'm not even sad anymore. I'm really not sad. When it's like, this man, like 20 years later, got the biggest fucking Hail Mary, charitable gift of mankind from all these people for him to finish his story. And what does he do? He makes it a filler fucking act. Goes nowhere near the ending of it. Bro, no, I don't feel bad for you now that Shenmue 4 will never fucking happen because you wasted the entire world's goodwill and money to make a fucking filler. Because that filler act was so fucking important. I should have finished the story, man. Just should have finished the fucking story.
He will in 10 years when he does another crowdfunding.
Oh my God. No one's going to crowdfund his ass anymore. It's sad too, because again, he once upon a time, one of the greatest game designers of all time.
I'll do it in your name just to spite you.
But like, then there's Tetsuya Takahashi with his Xeno franchise, and he had a story to tell, and he was way too ambitious. He was told to cut it off, and then he's like, well, let me finish this chapter in visual novel format. So he did, and it's still part 5 of 6. And then he tries to tell the whole thing from the beginning with someone else's money, and then they cut their losses at 3 instead of 6. And then Nintendo picks them up and dusts them off, and he this time takes everything he learned about how he fucking failed miserably at both ambition, scope, and design, fixes it completely. And then what happens? He gets to tell his whole story. Well, so to me, that's where it's like, version. Well, not even, well, we'll really never know, but it's like, he's never come this far. Because like his story's kind of done now. Like he got to tell his fucking story.
What if we just find out that he's like an alien from somewhere, and he's been trying to tell the story of his people as a warning to us, and that's why he spent 25 years to tell this goddamn story. And everybody just thinks, oh, that's cool.
Wow.
Fuck. Any final thoughts on author's intent, authorship?
I think my biggest takeaway from all this is that like we don't really get a lot of that in the game industry. And again, like I think people really, if anything, fuck fandoms, because y'all take this shit way too seriously. Like
I think that's part of the fun.
I don't follow Zelda anymore because they've changed hands of who's writing Zelda over and over. Tears of the Kingdom's about to come out. I fully expect Ganondorf's character to be fucking shit in that game, because it's not the same people who fucking were there to create the character of Ganondorf when they made Ganondorf a character and not just the end boss. I fully expect it to be shit, but I don't care.
In a Zelda game where Ganondorf is the main character.
I don't care. I've just, to me, I'm just like, whatever. Both the ship sailed. It's fine. It's over. I don't. And when it comes to relationship stuff, I'm really not disinterested. I really don't care. When it's like, well, what do you think about this character? They end up with that character. And I'm like, I really don't fucking care. They end up with, whoa. And some people were really weirded out. There's definitely a bit of I don't know, is there a phobia for polygamy, or like, oh, poly relationships can't exist, it's a fabrication or whatever. Some people were really upset that a character in 2 ended up in a poly relationship.
I think polygamy is looked down on in the sense that most of the times when polygamy was done or has been done, it was women were subservient to a man.
Yeah,
it was a weird, like, I don't think there's necessarily, like, nobody's out here.
Which is weird because, like, when I do hear the people throwing the vitriol about that, they're like, oh, they objectified them, they just made them prize. I'm like, that's really not how the story or the characters were played out at all. Like none of us saw this coming because it's a time skip. It's just, oh yeah, someday in the future, like by the way, he married all three of them in the future, and it's like, wow, did not see that coming.
Yeah, I don't
but
think
like,
there's really a stigma against it, other than I feel like I'd be very tired if I had 3 significant others.
whatever. I mean, me
champ.
personally, it's not me. I'm not that kind of person like myself in real life, and whatever. And like, oh, this fictional character ended up that way. Whatever.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't even like part of the story. It was just like, yeah, they grew up. They got older. They all decided to like marry each other and have kids together. Okay.
Yeah, I just
but I can understand where one of the voice actors like, I didn't see it. I don't see it that way at all. Like from their perspective, it's just like I just don't see it. And it's like,
I mean,
cool.
in a way, it could be just being lazy, right? Like you didn't want to pick one over the other and cause a fandom meltdown.
Part of me felt it almost was like a troll because they're like, oh, Xenogames always have a character who always gets friend zoned hard. And I almost was like, maybe the director was just like, you know what, fuck you. He married all of them. There.
Amazing.
There's my answer.
My
almost is like just a giant like fu to everyone saying like he always like friend zoned someone, in a triangle or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, you know what? All of them. Yeah. Everyone ended up together.
I guess my final thought on this is that we don't really have enough people that are auteurs, or maybe rather it's that we don't have good enough criticism to identify auteurs. Like part of the thing, film critics are generally the ones who identify and laud specific auteurs. Like you can argue that there's a lot more auteurs than film critics have identified, but gaming criticism has been a mixed bag at best.
Yeah.
In terms of,
here's what I really feel. I find it interesting. I think it's cool when an actor disagrees with the writer. Not to the extent that they throw so much of a shit fit and say the game sucked. Like I'm part of a terrible. I'm just like, no, I just don't know. I think it's interesting when you have someone who's that inhabited the mind of that character, right? And they just have a fucking different take on where they think the story would have gone than the author did.
Yeah, 2 different artists working on the same story.
I think that's fascinating because they're both artists, right? They're both deeply invested in said story character, and they both have wildly different takes on where it would have gone. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Personally, like I don't know why people are all like, no, well, you're going against the. I mean, this person wasn't slamming the director or the writer or saying whatever. Not really. So I'm just kind of like, I just think it's fascinating, really, to have, especially like when you see a movie, right? And a movie has like a controversial ending or whatever, and it's like, oh, the actor thought this, like, oh, like I'm blanking on like it's not Inception, but like, okay, like, oh, did the needle drop at the end of Inception? Was he in a dream or did he make it back to reality? And Michael Caine says one thing, the director won't say the other, right? It's like, I think it's interesting when you have people who have different interpretations of the ending. The ending of The Thing, for example, was Keith David the Thing? Was McCready, or were they both human at the end? The ultimate answer kind of doesn't matter, but like people say, like argue back and forth over whether or not, between Kurt Russell and Keith David, who was part of the alien thing and who wasn't,
Well, I'm gonna say my take on it right now to end the episode. They were both human because if one of them was the alien, there's no reason to lie anymore. There's only one fucking human left, so eat them. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that's kind of like the ultimate thing too, where it's like it's kind of like it doesn't matter,
right?
Like,
it doesn't matter. It's about human distrust.
They both know that they're dead. They both know there's no way out. And they're both fucked either way. And like, let's just wait a while and see what happens. We're both just gonna die. It's almost like him at the beginning of the movie with the chess, the computer chess game, and he just because like he gives it a drink literally and just pours the thing in there. It's like, oh, there's no winning this game.
Yeah.
So he fries the computer with alcohol.
God, such a good movie.
Yeah, I know it's a good movie. It's like
They should remake it again.
no, no.
What
But
they really should do is John Carpenter should make the Dead Space movie, and he said he would do it absolutely, and they just won't greenlight it.
Yeah, that's so weird to me that they're all like, yeah, and like John Carpenter's like, I would absolutely come out of retirement and do Dead Space, and they're like, yeah, no, let's not do a Dead Space movie. I'm like, why? You like
No
this
vision.
is perfect for him. Just let him do it. Fuck.
Just give him-
everyone wants to see it, but the fucking studio exec.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell that's about, but fuck them. That's all I want to say. All right. But we have some patrons to thank. If you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Dude of the week was the Pink Hammer, and he is also a producer. Our producers for this episode are Mutton Chops Johnson, the Pink Hammer, the Schmidt One, Screwnami, Kroy35, Hyperviper89, Ziggy Z, and Online Persona. Thank you, dudes, and we will catch you next time.
Salute.